On today's episode, I'll get into what's left of the Blackhawks training camp roster and Lukas Reichel's season preview.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Blackhawks fans? Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and find me on X at Jack Bushman2. Be sure, though, to go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way, you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And last but certainly not least, got to remind you all as well that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. If you haven't signed up already, be sure to go and visit FanDuel.com right now. And when you throw $5 down, you'll get $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. When I was wrapping up the opening segment on yesterday's episode, I did quickly go over Kevin Korchinski, Frank Nazar, and Louis Crevier being reassigned to the Rockford IceHogs of the AHL. AJ Spellacy reassigned to the Windsor Spitfires of the OHL as well. I did share a quick little reaction and talked about what it meant for each of those three players who were going to Rockford in particular and how it kind of impacted their projections for this upcoming year. But I didn't mention how it kind of impacted the rest of the Blackhawks training camp roster, because at this point in time, with Korchinski and Nazar going down to Rockford, those were kind of the two most intriguing pieces and intriguing parts of storylines to be keeping an eye on through training camp. Those were probably the two Blackhawks prospects that had the best chance, even though I always reiterated it was an outside chance for them to make the Hawks opening night roster. They were the two with the best opportunity, and now that they are officially down in Rockford, things are pretty much cut and dry here for the Blackhawks. But I do want to reiterate, because it was a pretty quick reaction to that during my opening segment on yesterday's episode. I do want to be sure to mention again, I think it was the right decision by the Blackhawks to send both Nazar, and Korchinski down to Rockford. For Nazar, he hasn't played a game at the AHL level yet. He came right into the NHL after wrapping up his year with Michigan, helping them get to the Frozen Four. And he didn't wow over the coaching staff like he needed to. I mentioned several times on the show, that's what it was going to take for Frank Nazar to win a job out of camp. He was going to have to leave the coaching staff with absolutely no choice but to keep him in the opening night lineup, and he just didn't force their hand like that. And that's no harm, no foul. It was going to be a tough thing for Nazar to do, considering all the additions the Blackhawks made in the offseason. And I love to see yesterday, he didn't slouch, he didn't get down on himself. In the IceHogs preseason opener, Nazar scored the opening goal of the game for Rockford. He also added an assist to help them pick up a 4-3 victory in their preseason opener. So love to see that out of Frank Nazar. And as I mentioned yesterday, if he keeps up the hard work and does a lot of good things down in Rockford, we're going to be seeing him up in Chicago sometime sooner rather than later. And for Korchinski, he had that opportunity, and Luke Richardson even mentioned this when talking with the Blackhawks media yesterday. In that game against the Wild, with Wyatt Kaiser still being out due to illness, he had an opportunity to really cement himself and prove to the coaching staff that he's here to stay for good. And it was quite honestly the opposite performance of what he needed. In fact, it was pretty clear at that point, following the loss to the Wild, that Korchinski just does need some seasoning down in Rockford. And that's probably the right decision as well for him, because he wasn't eligible for that level last year. He hasn't played a game for the IceHogs in his career, and that's been a nice little stepping stone for Blackhawks defenseman prospects specifically over the last couple of years. So not disappointed, not surprised to see either of them go down to Rockford. But again, with that being the case now, things are pretty cut and dry for the Blackhawks opening night roster. Again, as we're down to 5 days away, Blackhawks fans, from things kicking off for real against the Utah Hockey Club on October 8th. One more reminder, please go and hit that like button, comment down below, and most importantly, subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube so you don't miss out on any of the great content that I have planned leading up to the start of the regular season. But speaking on who's left of the Blackhawks roster, getting into the forward group, pretty cut and dry. Like I said, there's only 15 bodies left now that Frank Nazar has been reassigned to Rockford. Those 15 are Joey Anderson, Andreas Athanasiou, Brandon Baddock is probably the surprise of this group, Connor Bedard, Tyler Bertuzzi, Jason Dickinson, Ryan Donato, Nick Foligno, Taylor Hall, Philip Kurashev, Pat Maroon, Ilya Mikheyev, Lukas Reichel, Craig Smith, and Teuvo Teravainen. That makes 15. And as I just mentioned, Brandon Baddock is probably the surprise here. From what I've heard from the Blackhawks beat, they just kind of wanted to have another body around, and Baddock absolutely is going to go to Rockford sometime sooner rather than later. So those are going to be the 14 that the Blackhawks are going to go with on their opening night roster once Baddock does get set down. And that was always probably the plan. And one of the more difficult parts of Nazar potentially making this roster, if he did go and have a phenomenal camp in preseason, who are the Blackhawks going to send to Rockford? Because one of these guys, I mean, none of them are waiver eligible. They'd all are waiver exempt, excuse me. They all would have to go through waivers. So the Blackhawks would have to risk losing one of these 14 guys for free, or they'd potentially have to trade one of them. So it was always going to be complex for Frank Nazar to make this team out of camp. But yeah, expect once Baddock gets reassigned, those will be the 14 that the Blackhawks will have on their opening night roster when they kick things off in Utah. The real question now is who are going to be the two healthy scratches on October 8th in Utah. As of yesterday at Blackhawks practice, it was Lukas Reichel and Andreas Athanasiou as the two on the outside looking in, probably as a result of their lackluster performance on the second line with Taylor Hall and that dreadful 7-2 defeat to the Minnesota Wild. So those two are going to have to get back on the coaching staff's good side to get in the lineup when they take on the Utah Hockey Club in less than a week's time. On the defensive side of things, a little bit more interesting here for the Blackhawks. There are 8 defensemen, still left on the Blackhawks roster. It's Nolan Allen, TJ Brody, Seth Jones, Wyatt Kaiser, Alec Martinez, Connor Murphy, Isaac Phillips, and Alex Vlasic. The latest update that we have on Wyatt Kaiser is he's still out at the moment. The Blackhawks are hoping to ramp him up soon. He dodged a little bit of a health scare that popped up on his pre-camp physical. Fortunately, it seems like everything is going to be okay, but we just don't have a timeline on Wyatt Kaiser at this point in time. And again, 5 days until games matter. It's hard to feel confident that Wyatt Kaiser is going to be ready to be in the lineup for the Blackhawks in that game. I mean, he hasn't seen any preseason action whatsoever. So do the Blackhawks consider sending him down to Rockford to kind of get him ready for game-like situations? It's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on this over the next couple of days. But should Kaiser not be ready for October 8th, the other 7 defensemen on the roster will be the 7 the Blackhawks begin things with. If Wyatt Kaiser is ready, that's where things get a little bit more interesting, because it feels like it would be down to he or Nolan Allen for that final roster spot. Isaac Phillips, to me, with his boatload of experience, I feel like the Blackhawks front office probably has more allegiance and puts more eggs in the Nolan Allen basket. But to me, Isaac Phillips is more physically mature at this point in time. He's been very physical and taken on the coaching staff's messages with open arms and responded really well throughout the preseason and the training camp. He's absolutely earned a spot on the Blackhawks opening night roster. I've been kind of preaching that for several weeks here now. So I think he's going to be in the lineup regardless. It's going to come down to Nolan Allen and Wyatt Kaiser for me. And how about Nolan Allen really winning over the coaching staff? It seems like after, getting off to a decent start at rookie camp, I feel like they really like his size and his physicality for, being a young man back there. And I've mentioned he's kind of had a leg up, so it seems, over Ethan Del Mastro. Nolan Allen has an opportunity to make this Blackhawks roster out of camp. I didn't even think that was going to be in the cards, but we'll see what winds up happening with Wyatt Kaiser. That's kind of going to be the final determiner as to what this defensive unit looks like on October 8th in Utah. And then in net for the Blackhawks, no real surprises. They do still have 4 netminders on the roster because Laurent Brossoit hasn't fully returned from injury, but he is skating on his own and does seem like He's still on the same timeline, 5 to 7 weeks when it was first announced. He underwent that meniscus procedure. But Drew Commesso, Arvid Soderblom, still on the roster as of now, but we do know that's going to be the duo down in Rockford. Hopefully, Brossoit will be ready in 5 days' time to back up Peter Mrazek in that season opener. But there is what's left of the Blackhawks training camp roster. Only a couple of final decisions left to be made. 2 final preseason games worth of action over the weekend before things start mattering for real next Tuesday. Couldn't be more excited for the NHL season opener. Gonna take a quick break here, Blackhawks fans, but don't go anywhere, because when I return, I have to get into Lukas Reichel's 2024-25 season preview. But first, real quick, I do got to talk to you all about Game Time. Hockey season is right around the corner, and I cannot wait to get back to the United Center here in Chelsea Dagger, grabbing a cold beverage and enjoying the atmosphere at the Madhouse. And I'm sure many of you Blackhawks fans watching and listening to this right now feel the exact same way that I do, and that's why I got to talk to you all about Game Time. And Game Time has a new feature that's called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets to your favorite live events, not just hockey, even easier. And I personally have used Game Time since I was in high school. This is not part of the ad read. Game Time, excuse me, is always the number one place that I go to whenever I need to purchase my tickets, whether I'm going down to the United Center to watch a Blackhawks game, going down to Wrigley Field to see the Cubbies, or even if I'm traveling in another city and want to go see a comedy event or want to go see a concert with one of my buddies. I actually just went down to Wrigley Field for a bachelor party last Friday, and what did I use to purchase my ticket? No BS. I used Game Time because it's the fastest, cheapest, and easiest way for you to purchase your tickets. Plus, I love how they provide seats, images of every seat in the venue so you know exactly what to expect before you arrive and before you make your purchase. I highly recommend you all go and download the Game Time app right now, and when you do, create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. Yes, you can get $20 off to come see Connor Bedard down at the United Center this season. All you got to do, download Game Time, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed, Game Time. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't mind me, just going to take a quick sip of my coffee here. Before we get into segment 2, I do want to thank you all for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can easily find the link to Locked On NHL down in the description of this video, or simply search on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2, time to get into my next Chicago Blackhawks 2024-25 season preview segment. One of the favorite things that I do leading into the start of the regular season year after year. And for those who have missed it, I've already gone over Connor Bedard's season preview. Teuvo Teravainen's season preview was on yesterday's episode. And I've also gone over Seth Jones' season preview. And I still have many more coming out before October 8th. I got Taylor Hall, Andreas Athanasiou, Alex Vlasic. I'll have a goaltenders episode coming out as well. So again, just another reason to go and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the great Blackhawks content that I'm going to be dropping here. Next up, though, on my Blackhawks season previews is none other than 22-year-old Lukas Reichel, who, as I alluded to in the thumbnail of today's video, is kind of entering a make-or-break type of season, a very crucial stage of his career, because he's yet to kind of prove to the Blackhawks organization, to the fans, or to anyone in the NHL that he is a full-time NHLer. We've seen bits, we've seen pieces, but we've yet to see Lukas Reichel put it all together. And I don't want to be too hard on him, because there were a lot of games, a lot of recaps last year where I was calling out Lukas Reichel. I think we do forget this is a kid who just turned 22 years old this past summer. Yeah, last year was absolutely disappointing, and I'm not making excuses for him. It was very concerning, especially after the way that he looked in training camp. The amount of performances where he went completely ghost mode was unacceptable. And with this being kind of the third year that we're going through this, figuring out exactly what Lukas Reichel is, there's a little bit more pressure on his shoulders than there has been in the past. It's not quite a do or die type of year, but he only signed a 1-year extension with the Blackhawks. If he doesn't prove it to this organization right here, right now, he kind of jeopardizes his piece of the puzzle of the future. You wonder if the Blackhawks consider moving off of him. I probably wouldn't be so quick to pull that trigger, again, because of his age, but what Lukas Reichel does on the ice this year is really going to determine exactly what kind of player we envision he can be down the road. And like I mentioned, we've seen little bits, we've seen little pieces, but it just hasn't been consistent enough. In the 2022-2023 season, we saw Reichel, what we thought, finally find his stride at the NHL level towards the end of the year in a late season stint, wound up playing in 23 games at the NHL level that year. Most of his best work, though, came in that final call-up, wound up tallying 7 goals and 8 assists for 15 points, and 7 of those 8 goals were from the even strength variety. So a lot of good work from Reichel. Looked like he was going to be ready to make the full-time leap to the NHL last year. As I alluded to, was phenomenal in training camp. I mean, so much so that on my Blackhawks bold predictions episode, which, yes, I still will have one of those coming before the start of the regular season as well. Don't think I'd leave that out this year, Blackhawks fans. But in my bold predictions episode from last year, I said that Lukas Reichel is going to lead the Blackhawks in points because that's how good he looked during the preseason and during the training camp. Wound up putting up a fat stinker throughout basically all of last year. Didn't even finish the year at the NHL level, was reassigned to the Rockford IceHogs, kind of a path that we thought had been closed for him at this stage. But in total, 65 games with the Blackhawks, only 5 goals, fewer than what he had in 23 games the year prior, 11 assists for 16 points. Only 3 of his 5 goals were at the even strength variety, 3 even strength goals in 65 games, only shot 6%, wasn't good at the faceoff dot when given an opportunity to play center, had a lot of giveaways. It was not a very good year for Lukas Reichel, but again, as a 21-year-old, I'm not going to put too much stock into that, and I do think he has the capabilities to bounce back. But in terms of where does Lukas Reichel need to make the biggest improvements this year, what does he need to fix in order to be more effective? I just think it's consistency and mentality, right? Like, we've heard Luke Richardson preach the same things to Lukas Reichel over the last year, and part of my frustrations with the Lukas Reichel situation last season was he wasn't getting, even though he didn't help himself out, he was playing on the third and fourth line, and those just weren't situations where he was going to get himself out of the funk that he was in. At least right here, right now, the regular season hasn't started, but they're giving Lukas Reichel an opportunity to play in the top 6. He still hasn't taken advantage of that so far in the preseason. He hasn't been consistent enough. We know he can be an effective player. It's just like it's got to come out of him, and it almost reminds me of what we saw out of Philipp Kurashev before he put it together last season, right? Like, we'd see little bursts, we'd see little blips, but there was just no consistency in Lukas Reichel's game whatsoever, and I feel like he needs to be more assertive. He needs to be more aggressive. Like, in the preseason, when things aren't going well for Lukas Reichel and his line, they're not touching the puck. They're not playing with the puck. They're stuck playing defense the entire time, and he's just got to be more assertive. He's got to demand the puck. He's got to be more of a presence out there. He's got to command to get the puck back, and it just feels like there's too many times out there where he's skating and doesn't even touch the puck for an entire shift, and then when he does, he doesn't capitalize on it. He turns the puck over, and it goes in the other direction, and he's just not able to create in the neutral zone like we've seen from him in the past, and it's rather frustrating that he's just not able to put it all together. So I think the mentality and the consistency, those are 2 things that definitely need to be worked on for Lukas Reichel this year. I hope he can keep a right mentality because the confidence, it feels like it's a huge thing for a kid of his age. But again, I like that the Blackhawks and Luke Richardson are giving him a top 6 spot because I do think that'll help out in his confidence. And hopefully when he does get the ball rolling, it'll be a little bit of a snowball effect there. As far as do I think Lukas Reichel can bounce back this year? It's a good question. And honestly, it's tough to have confidence in that. I know he's capable of it, but it's tough to say I expect Lukas Reichel to bounce back because just from what I've learned watching hockey these last couple of years and kind of the feelings you get about certain players, I'm not going to rule it out, but I do have concerns about Lukas Reichel, especially from what we've seen from him in a couple of preseason games. I know they don't matter, and the regular season will be the ultimate teller, but I've been a little bit discouraged, and it's, again, just tough for me to say I expect him to bounce back. I expect him to be the type of player I thought he was going to be last year for the Blackhawks. It's tough for me to say that. I do think he's going to have a better campaign, but it's in his own hands. He needs to do more. What kind of numbers do I expect out of Lukas Reichel this year? Tough to put numbers on it, but that's the fun of doing this segment, and it's fun to always go look back at the end of the year to see if I was close or if I was totally wrong. Again, Reichel in 65 games last year wound up only putting up 16 points, 5 goals, and 11 assists. On an 82 game pace here this year, man, I went with 13 goals for Lukas Reichel. I do think he's going to respond better in the goal scoring department, but I just never see him as a prolific goal scorer in this league. I do think he's always going to be more of a playmaker. The assists, though, there's definitely room for improvement there because of how he's going to be used on the power play, albeit probably the second unit. But inside the top 6, if he's able to solidify that spot, and that's the difficulty in projecting numbers, we don't know if Lukas Reichel is going to be able to solidify that spot. These numbers could be higher. They could also be lower based on the type of year that he has. I'm guessing 13 goals, 22 assists, 35 points out of Lukas Reichel. Kind of similar, again, to what we saw out of Philip Kurashev at the start of his career. There's definitely upside potential there for Lukas Reichel, and he could hit 40. He can maybe even hit 50 if things go absolutely right. But again, it's just hard to kind of say I expect that based on what we've seen from him over the last year and a half. Hopefully I'm absolutely wrong, though. Would love to see Lukas Reichel have like a 20-25 type of year, goals and assists, right around 45-50 points. That's going to wrap up Lukas Reichel's 2024-25 season preview, though, Blackhawks fans. Be on the lookout for a couple more season previews dropping before October 8th. Going to take one final break, but when I return, I'll get into an update on the Blackhawks' European prospects. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you about the fine folks over at FanDuel. The NHL season is taking over, Blackhawks fans. Where is my FanDuel? There it is. The NHL season is about to take over, but real quick, to all my NFL fans out there, can now start the season with a big return over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can go and check out the latest stats and view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you also place your bets. And all my hockey fans out there, to all my Blackhawks fans in particular, FanDuel has now dropped the lines for each and every NHL team's projected point total for this upcoming season. For the Blackhawks, FanDuel has listed them at 74.5, which I think is a really, really savvy number. I expect them to be in the ballpark of 70 to 78 points, somewhere around there. But if you have an inkling on the over or the under, be sure to go and check out FanDuel.com right now. And if you're not already signed up, create an account. And when you put $5 down, you'll get $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Again, go and create an account with FanDuel. And when you place $5 down, you'll get $200 worth of bonus bets free for America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Do want to reiterate again that Mailbag Monday is right around the corner. It's one of my favorite segments that I do week in and week out, and it's going to be the final Mailbag Monday before the regular season begins. And I know there are loads of viewers and listeners who have Blackhawks questions that they want answered. Be sure to go and drop them in the comment section down below. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, you can hit me up on in any of my DMs on my social media channels with your questions, or you could also email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. It's one of my favorite segments, like I mentioned, but it takes two to tango. Can't do Mailbag Monday without your help, so please reach out with your Blackhawks questions, and I'll make sure to answer them right here on the show Monday morning. Segment 3, before I wrap things up, I do want to be sure to go over a little bit of an update on the Blackhawks' European prospects, because in recent episodes, I've covered all the Blackhawks prospects who are playing in college hockey this year. Fortunately, most of them are playing for top 25 programs, at least at this point in time before the start of the season. I believe Dominic Bassi for St. Lawrence is the only Blackhawks college prospect who isn't playing for a preseason top 25 team. A couple of days ago, I also broke down the Blackhawks prospects in the OHL and talked about kind of what the expected roles for each of those players are going to be, as well as the power rankings in the preseason for the OHL. I don't believe there are any Blackhawks prospects in the WHL or the QMJHL this year, interestingly enough, which I think is probably a result of how Kyle Davidson likes to draft. It's the OHL, the USHL, or they're going overseas, basically, it seems, for the Blackhawks. Someone correct me, by the way, if I'm wrong. If there is a prospect in the WHL or the QMJHL, please call me out in the comment section. I believe that is the case, though. And with that being the case, I did want to be sure to go over all the Blackhawks prospects we're playing over in Europe this season. And like I did for the OHL and for college, talk about what kind of roles we can expect for each of them and where we can expect them to potentially fit in one day down the road if that is the case. One thing I do want to mention as well, if you Google Blackhawks prospects and you hit the Elite Prospects website, it says that says that Artur Kayumov, Parker Fu, Jakub Galvis, and Antti Sarella still are technically Blackhawks prospects. Yes, that is the case. The Blackhawks still hold their rights. However, I'd be really surprised if any of those 4 players wind up coming back to North America. Galvis probably has the best chance, I would say, because he was solid in the AHL, got a little bit of a stint in the NHL, and I thought he looked solid, but just never got another opportunity. Now plays for Malmo in the SHL, by the way. But the first Blackhawks European prospect that I want to bring up is Roman Kantsarov, 44th overall pick in the 2023 NHL draft for the Blackhawks, who is not currently healthy to be playing with Metallurg in the KHL, as he is recovering from off-season shoulder surgery that it expects him to return to the lineup sometime around November, according to a post from Metallurg's coach earlier on in September. And last year for Kantsarov, decent regular season in his first full year in the KHL, 15 points, 8 goals and 7 assists in 53 regular season games. But he really flipped a switch in the playoffs to help Metallurg win the Gagarin Cup. 13 points in 23 playoff games after having only 15 points in 53 regular season games. 4 goals and 9 assists for Roman Kantsarov. Saw a huge uptick in ice time, was on the ice in a lot of crucial situations for Metallurg, had a lot of big-time goals and big-time assists. So hopefully he'll be able to get healthy and back on the ice sometime here soon. And whenever he does, I imagine he's probably going to have a top 6 role for Metallurg as well. He's going to be over there for at least the next 2 years, but hopefully once that contract expires, Roman Kantsarov is ready to come over to North America. I think he plays with a good pace, He has a good motor, good offensive characteristics, is a little bit undersized, but I do think his speed and skill will translate well to the NHL level as potentially a middle 6 forward. Next prospect I want to bring up is Victor Sternborg. There's still confusion over how you pronounce this young man's last name, but regardless, he was a 4th-round selection for the Blackhawks back in 2021, and he has just been racking up pivotal experiences over in Sweden. This is his 3rd full year already in the SHL and his 5th year in the league total. So lots of good experience for Hranbor. Not much of an offensive threat, but is known for his rugged style and being a good defensive-minded forward, which I think gives him a chance to be unique and potentially make it to the NHL one day for the Blackhawks. 18 points, 6 goals, and 12 assists in 46 games last year as a 20-year-old. Those are the best offensive numbers he's put up in the SHL thus far, which is considered to be the 3rd best league in the world now, behind the KHL and the NHL, of course. But another guy, like I said, who's got a good motor. Mentioned he does play a good defensive style. He's bounced all over the lineup, it seems, for the Vaxjo Lakers. I know I definitely butchered that pronunciation. I've seen him on the 2nd line. I've seen him centering the 4th line. Seems like he's kind of a Swiss Army knife type of player, but 2 goals through the first 5 games, off to a good start for Victor Hranborg, and he's actually playing with Blackhawks 2024 fifth-round pick Joel Svensson, 138th overall in this year's draft. 6 foot, 200-pound center, good size. Played in 7 SHL games last year, but has opened up this year, like I mentioned, with Vac Show along with Victor Sternborg. Still only 19 years old, not going to turn 20 until next April. The Blackhawks did draft him as an overager. Probably not elite offensive abilities, hence why he was selected in the 5th round, but he's got some good size. Still a young kid and racking up some good experience. Hopefully that continues to be the case for Joel Svensson the next 3 to 4 years. Ilya Safonov, another interesting European prospect for the Blackhawks, who was a 6th-round pick way back in 2021, but has developed quite nicely. 6'5", 225-pound center, got some really good size, and has spent the last 4 years over in the KHL playing for Akbars, and he's still only 23 years old, believe it or not. So, like Victor Hranborg, has just been racking up great professional experience. But after putting up 37 points, 19 goals, and 18 assists in 64 games as a 21-year-old, while also taking on leadership responsibilities that year, kind of had a disappointing output offensively last year with only 20 points in 67 games, 13 goals, and only 7 assists. Through the opening 9 games this year with Akbars, he's only had 2 points, 1 goal, and 1 assist. You love the size. You love that he can play both ends. He is someone who's taken on a leadership role. Don't imagine he's ever going to be like an elite offensive player for the Blackhawks, but because of his size and abilities and experience in the KHL, I wonder if the Blackhawks do have him on their radar. And the last one of the European prospects who I feel like probably has an NHL shot for the Hawks is Yuri Felchman, the 3rd-round pick in the 2023 NHL draft. Went 93rd overall, has some really good size as well. 6'4", 200-pound center. Bounced between the Swiss National League and their U20 league last season, and in the U20 league, nearly a point per game, 23 points in 26 games, 8 goals, and 15 assists. And so far in the National League this year, Felchman's off to a really good start. 5 assists in the opening 7 games, and he's still only 19 years old. So love to see that kind of productivity out of a player with good size. Hopefully he'll be able to kind of continue developing his pace and his skating ability over the next couple of years, because if he can keep up, that'll give Yuri Felchman a chance. Last 4 prospects, Milton Oskarsson, Jani Peltonen, Rico Tohila, and Niels Juntorp, all were 6th or 7th round selections in the last couple of years. Oskarsson, 6th round pick in 2023, another guy with good size, 6'6", 220, has already played 2 years in the SHL at 21 years of age, but hasn't really ever lit it up offensively, doesn't have any points through the first 5 games this year, so probably an outside chance that he ever makes it. Same with Jani Peltonen, who was a 7th round pick a year ago, 6'3", 180-pound left-handed defenseman. Spent all of last year in Finland's U20 league, 15 points in 46 games, decent numbers, and he could actually play in Finland's Liga this year, which, as a 19-year-old would be really good experience. So, and a good opportunity there for Peltonen. Rico Tohila, 6'7", 210-pound forward, someone who is always fun to watch in Blackhawks camp, but hasn't been there the last couple of years. He also played a couple of games in Finland's Liga last year, but is actually playing in the same league as Peltonen right now, the Finnish Development League. 1 goal through the opening 5 games for the 19-year-old Rico Tohila, who's turning 20 in December. And then last but certainly not least, my boy Niels Juntorp. Shout out my brother Will McClory, who was the Juntorp insider when Juntorp was playing for the Dubuque Fighting Saints in Iowa. He was the 188th overall selection for the Blackhawks in 2022. 6'1", 220-pound winger. In the USHL, when he played for Dubuque, he tallied 27 points, 12 goals and 15 assists in 59 games, and then jumped overseas and played in the Hockey Allsvenskan League, the 2nd division over in Sweden. 15 points in 36 games last year, 6 goals and 10 assists, and is off to a really good start in the same league this year with 3 points, 2 goals, and 1 assist through 3 games. Still only 20 years old, and isn't set to turn 21 until November. Juntorp, Tohila, Peltonen, and Oskarsson, though, those 4 guys I think are real outsiders to ever make it over to North America in the Blackhawks organization. Kanserov, Sternborg, Safonov, Felchman, Svensson. Those are the ones in particular that I would be keeping an eye on these next couple of years if I was a Blackhawks fan. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. If you want to check me out on X, you can find me at Jack Bushman 2. For my Strictly Blackhawks account, be sure to go and follow at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your days. I'll be having a preview of the Blackhawks' second to last preseason contest with the Minnesota Wild dropping tomorrow. Until then, everyone have a good one, and I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.